You're listening to the DCAU Review, hosted by Cal and Liam, streaming on iTunes, Google Podcasts, and at DCAUReview.com. Now, here's today's episode.
Welcome, everybody, to episode 29 of the DCAU Review. I am one of your hosts, Cal, and with me today, as he has been for our prior 28 episodes, is my friend, good brother, and the DCAU Review Twitter guru, Liam. Liam, welcome to this episode of DCAU Review.
You know, we're still covering Batman Beyond here, and we've got another double feature today.
We do. I'm excited about this. We have two episodes. One is going to be entitled Heroes. So that was the next episode in order of the Batman Beyond episodes. And then the second episode we're going to be covering is Shriek, which of course deals with introducing a new villain to the Batman Beyond Rogues Gallery. But let's start by covering the terrific trio. So this is an interesting episode. Had some brief memories. I don't know that we watched this a whole bunch growing up.
No.
It was not one that was in the rotation from my recollection in repeats. But it's a straight up pretty much homage to Jack Kirby and maybe a little bit of Steve Ditko and a whole lot of Marvel odes and nods. You have these guys, the terrific trio, that are straight rip-offs or homages, I guess, is probably a nudge and a wink to the old Fantastic Four.
A tribute, if you will.
Yes, yeah. They have similar powers to the Fantastic Four. They combined the Human Torch and the Thing into one character, and gave the other characters similar characteristics to Reed Richards and Sue Storm. What did you think of this episode? I think overall, and we're jumping right into plot as we always do. I think overall this episode had potential, and I don't know if it was just a fun way for the writers to use Marvel-esque things in the DCAU or what, but I felt a little bit let down by the plot overall. It was kind of all over the place.
Yeah,
and there was some I put generally okay, but I was kind of let down. You have this idea of using these characters and essentially using Marvel characters or odes to them in a DCAU cartoon, and it really seems to be a bit of a letdown.
Yeah, I'd agree with that for the most part. It's a little disjointed. You have these new heroes that just show up, and there's kind of a little bit hinted at that, maybe Terry feels like, well, if these guys are going to be here, that Batman's not needed. But that's not really explored. Like, is he jealous at that thought? Is he happy that maybe he's getting his life back? It's not really explored any deeper than just like a couple of cute lines about...
Right,
and maybe I'll have more time to do homework or something.
And we've seen that explored in several different. That's not an original idea.
Oh, sure.
The new hero comes along, and the hero, the standard hero, is either pushed to the side as far as popularity is concerned. And there's a little bit of a nod to that. There's a scene where Terry and his brother Matt go to the mall, and there's a toy store, and they have all these terrific trio merchandise.
Yeah.
But Terry doesn't even get to experience jealousy of it because Matt McGinnis is like, Batman's better. So you don't have that dynamic. You don't have the, Terry gets to quit and no longer has to be Batman anymore, which I feel like they could have gone. But, we talked about, there's a couple nods to Steve Ditko, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but you could have done the Spiderman no more. He throws he tells Bruce that he doesn't need to be Batman anymore. Bruce tries to convince him that these guys are government cronies, which they are. They're through happenstance they become these Fantastic Four like characters, not hit by cosmic rays. But they do turn into these characters and then immediately become agents for the government or something. But I think overall that it looks like, I don't know. And then the rest of the plot just seems to jump around a lot.
Yeah, and then it's like Magma is convinced that his other partner, the fourth, who would have been, I guess, the fourth member of this terrific trio, conveniently wasn't there that night. His name is Dr. Hodges,
Right.
who conveniently wasn't there, who was sort of, later we find out, was sort of like professional rivals with Magma. But, so we have Magma's all suspicious, and then so he decides to go steal, like, this DNA research that's been done that Hodges is trying to keep secret. And then he runs afoul of Batman. He gets away, but Batman follows him, and then you just kind of get to the final bit. They try to recreate the experiment that gave them their powers, and Hodges then reveals, "Oh, I always knew that this was going to happen," basically, or that at least that it wasn't safe, and that it could have.
It's a little bit of a Victor Von Doom.
Yes,
he was interested in the character of Freon.
Yes,
and Freon is with Magma, so he
thought if he could basically
kill
or disfigure Magma, that he would have Freon all to himself, I guess. So it's sort of that thing where, like, oh, the real monster isn't the lava man, it's man. You know, it's not the real monster. It's kind of like a King Kong thing or something. But
right.
Again, not really explored that deep. That confession by Hodges comes with 3 minutes in the episode left, and then Batman and the terrific trio just fight, and that's kind of the end of the episode. So
because it was generally okay and it was all over the place, and for the weird inclusion of General Hitler, or whatever, there's a character who looks. He has the Hitler mustache. We called him General Thunderbolt Hitler.
Yes,
we think he's because he plays like the role of Thunderbolt Ross from the Hulk comics or Hulk cartoon or Hulk movies, working for the government, trying to kill his own experiment. And but for some reason they gave him a Hitler mustache, and I don't understand that. I gave plot 3 out of 10.
Yeah, I went 4 out of 10, pretty much, right on the same wavelength there, shockingly.
No way.
But, it's not the worst episode, and there's certainly fun to be had.
Sure.
But, again, when you look at this stuff under more of a critical lens, I think you just a lot of it's just kind of incoherent.
Swing and a miss. All right, let's move on to music. I got a little bit excited because when they introduced the terrific trio, there's a theme song that plays in the background. It's a heroic theme, and you're like, oh, they're going to get a cool heroic theme throughout this episode.
Yeah,
and that's kind of where it stops for me. There is, I hate to say it, but as we've now seen, this is what the 5th Batman Beyond episode we've covered, or so. You start a lot of the theme, because it is rock music, just kind of blends together into generic rock music number 5.
That's
fair. It's okay. It's not offensive. It's not the acoustic guitar played at the end of every serious.
We do get some piano.
movie.
We do get a sort of an homage. Speaking of Marvel homages, to the Bruce Banner sad hitchhiking music that would play at the end of the 60s Hulk TV series.
Yeah, it's a weird end to that episode, to this episode too, by the way. Just kind of the main characters, I guess, die. 2 of them Batman accidentally kills, and one of them just turns into a hardened lava rock.
Yes.
And then Batman just walks away.
Yeah. Yeah, he's like, all right, my work here is done.
That sad piano music really adds to it. I gave music, because it's just kind of, I gave it 6 out of 10.
Yeah, I went 5 out of 10. There's some nice flourishes here and there. There's a scene where Magma has stolen this DNA evidence and is trying to get away, and him and Batman have kind of a chase scene. And there's some cool music there where I think the rock music actually does add something to it. But yeah, overall, just not a lot to write home about here.
Sure. All right, let's jump over to voice acting, Liam. So I don't. Let's talk about our players, our things that we have to remember. Our main people here that are, I don't know what I'm saying. Guest stars. Yeah. Yes. How about our guest stars?
Yeah. So we have first and foremost, we have as Magma, we have Robert Davi, who is maybe most famously one of the agents in Die Hard. He's also in Goonies.
Okay.
So, one of those, if you saw him, you might know him type of voices.
Okay.
You have, I might butcher her last name, so I apologize, but Laura San Giacomo as
2
Freon.
stars. 5 stars. Good job.
And also have sort of veteran voice actor Jeff Glenn Bennett as 2D Man. And then finally, the one that jumped out to us, which was Kevin Dunn as Dr. Howard Hodges. Twofold. One, because Kevin Dunn has been a producer for the WWE for about 30 years too long. And
crossover.
And because I also do a wrestling podcast, that name jumped out. Different Kevin Dunn, though. He played Shia LaBeouf's dad in the Transformers movie.
Yes, sleep well, handsome man.
That's right. I'll defend that first Transformers movie.
I love the first Transformers.
But anyway, yeah, so Kevin Dunn plays Dr. Hodges as sort of the real villain of the episode. And then, of course, we have to mention DCAU legend Corey Burton as General Norman, a.k.a. Thunderbolt Hitler.
Yes, in a underrated, distracting performance.
Yeah, but
he also I think he played one of the cops in the scene
definitely.
with the terrorists that have captured.
Corey Burton never only plays one voice in any episode he's in.
Yeah, he's the utility infielder of the. For sure. Go ahead.
Yeah, I went ahead. I gave voice acting 6 out of 10. There's some stuff that's okay. Like I thought, Dunn as Hodges is pretty good, and I thought Robert Davi as Magma is fine. Mm-hmm. And there's some sort of element of tragedy to that story that like Magma rescues a little girl and the girl's terrified, and so he's like sort of angry because he feels like he got turned into a monster and his best friend or one of his friends betrayed him.
It's the thing. Like if you've ever watched the old Fantastic Four cartoon or read any Fantastic Four comic books, Thing, because he's ugly rock creature, has this complex that people see him as a monster. It's Hunchback of Notre Dame.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's any of those old tropes of, oh, he's ugly, so therefore he's rejected by society and seen as a monster.
Yeah, so I did think Robert Davi did a pretty good job of conveying that, but again, you have 22 minutes. You can't dive into that in the way that a comic book series can with a character like The Thing, or a movie or a TV series.
And this is a one-and-done appearance.
Correct. So that's this is another episode that maybe if it was a recurring character or someone, if he was like part of the Rogues Gallery from here out, and there's that more tragic element.
Or if they, I wouldn't want to see I don't think this deserves a two-parter necessarily.
Not necessarily.
But if you set these characters up as heroes here in this episode, there's another generic villain. We'll say Hodges was the villain, and you don't turn them heel. Mm-hmm. And crossover. But then later on, there's a tragedy that happens and they turn that's when they turn, then maybe you can identify, but I don't care.
And there is something of a reveal that their DNA is like falling apart so that they might be dying as well as a result of this
and going crazy,
right?
They were like, oh, they'll be more
psychotic. So if that had like played out over 2 or 3 episodes and you kind of have these guys as side characters for half a season and then
similar to how they end up doing in the JOU Cadmus arc with the ripoffs from the Ultimen, where you have one of them that's involved, and you begin, even if you don't really care about them, or you can see from a mile away that there's going to be some sort of betrayal. You have a character that you can at least see is trying. Starts out as a hero, and then the tragedy of them turning villain. So we got a little off track there.
Yeah.
But my voice acting score was 5 out of 10. I think it's okay. I think that there was room for more creativity in the voices, but overall it's just kind of there.
Yeah, that's fair. If I didn't already say, I said 6 out of 10 for me.
6 out of 10 for you. All right, let's move to animation, Liam. So animation, I think so far, listening to our previous episodes and going back over those, I think the remarkable thing about Batman Beyond is the consistency of the animation thus far.
Oh, sure.
It seems, we're only 5 episodes in thus far. We'll be 6 after our second episode we review here. But the consistency of the animation, nothing looks off model. The artistry seems to be pretty consistent. And for this episode, I thought it was okay. It was fine. I think that they could have done more with the characters. You have this opportunity to sort of give this homage, and I think 2D Man is interesting. I think there were times where it didn't communicate completely that he was supposed to be a flat character, because it's hard to communicate that when you have two-dimensional characters also on the screen, that are drawn to look three-dimensional. So at times, like when you look at his hands and his hands looked like pieces of paper curled up or something like that, then it made it more obvious. But there were other times where he was just standing there, and it was difficult to differentiate him from a what's supposed to be a 3D character. And Magma, we commented on how visually he resembled Clayface.
Yes.
Sort of if you had taken the original Clayface design from Batman the Animated Series and moved him to the new Batman Adventures instead of redesigning him like they did. If you had just taken that, copied and pasted, and then like used the fill with color and MS Paint, you probably could have gotten Magma. I thought there were a couple cool things they did with Magma, but as far as like the footprints that he left behind when he walked were cool, and that power is certainly a unique power, having that lava power. What about anything stick out for you in visual?
I mean, I thought Magma is definitely the most visually interesting part of it. The scene where he breaks into the lab. Terry just comes in, he's sort of seeing the aftermath of what Magma's done, and so there's like holes basically cut into walls, and there's still like lava dripping off of them. So like you get the impression that this guy is like a walking hot zone. Like he's everything he touches melts. And there's a scene where he tries to basically does the Superman thing where he puts his hands around a bomb and it explodes between his hands.
That was kind of cool.
That was cool. And I did like Freon's design. I thought she looked very cool. No pun intended. And
pun intended. Get out of here.
Exactly, 100% intended. But I thought that, and the visuals at the end when Terry turns on like the ventilation system, 2D Man gets sucked up through the vent directly, and you see basically his entire body stretch out and then get sucked through the vent, and then Freon, like because she's a gas, so her entire body just is ripped apart, and that visual is haunting. and also, but they pulled it off, and it does look painful and tragic.
Amazing they were able to show that.
And I went ahead. I gave visuals 6 out of 10. I thought there was some really strong stuff. Overall, there could have been, I felt like maybe a little more punch to some of the action scenes. There's some cool shots. There's one like sort of shot where we follow 2D Man as he's fighting as the military attacks them, which again feels very Hulky as you mentioned. Where he's standing still and then he basically his torso extends and then his arms extend and you sort of follow him across the screen.
That was kind of cool.
This like big sweeping camera shot, which again I'm sure is a little bit of a difficult trick to pull off when it comes to animation. So. There's definitely some highlights there. I definitely think visuals is the strongest part of this episode. But yeah, overall I thought good, but not anything spectacular.
Yeah, Sam, that's why I gave it 7 out of 10. So I guess it's the bonus point sound.
Oh my
that
gosh.
means one of us has a bonus point, and it is not me.
I guess it's me then. I gave it a +1. There's, as we mentioned, tons of Marvel references. You mentioned tons of Steve Ditko, Jack Kirby, type of homages, and one of them there's a very famous Spider-Man cover that Steve Ditko drew. It was the end of the Master Planner arc, and it's Spider-Man. He's basically under a bunch of like metal wreckage, and there's water pouring down on him, and it's a very memorable thing. And there's a shot in here during the end as the building's sort of coming down around them where wreckage falls on Terry and he's trapped underneath it, and the design they used for the ceiling or whatever that fell on him is literally the exact same thing that fell on Spider-Man in that Master Planner issue.
You pulled this out.
I'll tweet out like a side by side of it because it's so cool. Yeah, and as soon as I saw it, I was like, "Oh my gosh, that's the Master Planner thing."
I was like, "What is that?" And you were like, "Oh, Google this," and I was like, "Holy crap!"
Yeah,
that's super nerdy, but also super cool.
But so I thought that was a really cool little flourish. Again, that's those little extra touches that you don't get in other animated shows. What made these so special? You know, the people making them are all a bunch of giant nerds too.
Of course.
And they obviously, it's not a secret what especially Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko, but all of those 1960s Marvel and DC had the effect that had on them as they make those shows. So just seeing that, but seeing us shout out that specific was like, oh man, I gotta give that an extra special shout out here.
So that brings us to our final scores then, Liam. My final score for this episode is 21 out of 40. What was yours?
And mine is a completely different 22 out of 40.
Middle of the road, probably some, not quite Golem, but to that level. As far as rewatchability, you can probably skip this episode if you have an extra half hour, you want to watch it.
I would say if you are more of a Marvel fanboy, or if you have a love for that era of comics, I do think it's worth watching for those shout outs.
Sure.
But if, like us, you were more of a DC household growing up, some of those references might be a little over your head,
or it just might be an eye roll.
Yeah, or you might just think, oh yeah, it's that one thing.
There you go.
So yeah, depending on your type of fandom, I would say, maybe. We'll give this a maybe.
All right, Liam. So let's move on to our second episode. Of course, that is the next episode in order. That would be Shriek. So this episode introduces us to a recurring character as a part of the Batman Beyond Rogues Gallery. Shriek once again shows up at least one more time. It might be twice.
I believe it's 2 more times.
And then I think he shows up. Is he in? He's definitely in Epilogue.
Yes.
In Justice League as well, right?
Yes, he is.
Yes, he does show up. He has a cameo in Epilogue as well. This is I thought I had seen this episode a whole bunch. I think this one was in heavier rotation, but I had forgotten a lot of the elements of this episode. But you have this guy, Shreve. What's his first name? Carl or something?
Hang on, let me...
Carl Shreve. I want to say it's like Rob, Carl, something very generic. But anyway, so Shreve is a scientist whose company is losing money because he's more interested in doing research on things that people don't need. Derek Powers is like, you created this suit that could destroy buildings, but dynamite is still cheaper.
Right.
So Derek Powers, I guess, buys him out.
Walter Shreve.
Yep, would not have gotten that. Walter Shreve. So they just call him Shreve. So Powers sort of uses him as a bounty hunter to try and kill Bruce Wayne because Bruce Wayne is fighting him on kind of taking over, buying up, and destroying old Gotham.
Yes.
And sort of redeveloping it. You have we talk about your modern day and your real life subplots here of the rich man moving into the old neighborhood to try and redevelop it and to gentrify it, I guess.
Yeah.
So you have Bruce that's sticking up for that area and wanting to preserve the history, and you have the rich CEO trying to move in and gain power and amass more land to own more of the city, essentially. So, because of that, you have this whole Shreve versus Bruce Wayne dynamic where he tries to convince him he's crazy. You then have Terry. There's a cool bit where Terry really gets to flex his detective muscle in this episode.
Yeah, absolutely. He gets to, because Bruce is in the hospital after Shriek's first attack, Terry has to find out what this, they get part of Shriek's suit. So he has to do the analyzing of that. He has to then go undercover. It's sort of Terry's version of like a Matches Malone type. He shows up at Shreve's...
Matches the Pizza Boy.
Industry, yes. Could have been like Matches' son or something.
Right.
Complete with a bad like Brooklyn accent.
It was terrible.
But again, it's those little flourishes. It's a very Batman thing.
Yeah.
And as much as good as most of the episodes we've reviewed so far have been, there hasn't been a lot of like pure like original Batman in there because again it's his own character, so you don't have to do a 1-to-1 comparison.
Sure.
But as the theme of the episode is that sort of just because there's a new Batman doesn't mean that the old Batman's ways or efforts are no longer meaningful. So the idea that Terry isn't able to just go, he can't be reactionary here. He has to be proactive. He has to go out and find Shriek, he has to go out, especially because Bruce isn't there to kind of hold his hand.
Yeah, I like it because it gives a new dimension. Terry's not just a punch and kick superhero.
Yeah,
and that's what separates Batman and has been for a long time. He's the world's greatest detective. Bruce was the world's greatest detective. So you have this dynamic that he's not just, like you said, reactionary. He's not just standing there and he's going to go and wait for something to happen and then fight. He's going out, he's doing research, he's figuring out how to outsmart and how to be there, two or three steps ahead of the villains in this episode. So, yeah, I really liked the plot in this episode. I really struggled to find anything that I felt was a plot hole. I love the whole dynamic with Bruce in the going to the psych ward and the psychological warfare that Shriek does versus Bruce, and he figures out that this is how he's going to end him. He's not just going to bust in and slit his throat. He's going to try and mentally force him to kill himself. That way, it could never be traced back in some
Correct.
way. Like, if Bruce ends up killing himself. So it was. I really, really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed the detective dynamic with Terry. I really enjoyed the final battle scene, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But because of all those things, I gave plot a 10 out of 10.
Wow. Well, surprise, surprise. I also gave plot 10 out of 10.
That's what I'm talking about.
It's so tight, and even little things like there's lines as you mentioned about dynamite's cheaper than this sound device. It's Derek Powers sort of matter-of-factly stating, that's why I had to buy you out. Because
right.
your business was going to go under because there's no practical application.
You're an idiot.
Right. Except to become a supervillain and work for me.
Yeah, he does a great job. There's some great Derek Powers manipulation. He even gives Shreve the name of Shriek.
Shreve shows up to kill him, and he so nonchalantly convinces him otherwise. So they really communicate that well, and they show you the arc of Shreve being sort of obviously hard up for money. He got bought out by Powers. He's put up to this idea of trying to kill Bruce. It doesn't work. He tries a more psychological approach. But then because of Terry, finding him and getting him to sort of attack in public, he's now a fugitive. And so now he's lost his mind, and he doesn't know what to do. And Derek Powers, as the puppet master, is then able to very easily manipulate him into, okay, just be a supervillain, go kill Batman, and it works. It all works really well.
I agree. All right, let's jump on over to music. I had a similar reaction to the music that I had from Terrific Trio, which the very first introduction of Shriek, there's a cool sound effect, and then all of a sudden the music kicks in.
Earthquake? Not like any I've ever been in.
Well, whatever it is, I can think of better places to be right now. You know this guy?
Sorry, not one of mine.
But it sort of just blends into the background as generic rock music again, I think. And there's not a unique enough, I would say. I think in the Ink episode, there's a unique soundtrack in that episode that stands out enough. It still fits in with the overall rock music theme, but I just feel like this episode seemed to blend in the background for me. I gave music 7 out of 10 on this one. Yeah?
Yeah, I went 5 out of 10, kind of for the same things you said. There's a little cool bit of, Shriek has a little bit of a unique theme when he first appears. Mm-hmm. And there's I did like a little bit, they don't do much music in the final scene as we'll get to in visuals, but there's light music that sort of adds a little bit to the tension, but I honestly almost thought that took away a little bit, because this whole bit is that there's basically no sound. Shriek has this device that allows him to basically turn off all sound, and he's able to sort of focus it so he can hear Terry's footsteps and nothing else, basically.
And Terry can also only hear his footsteps.
Correct.
He
So
can't
he's
hear
in
the
this
sound
like car manufacturing plant. He's like bumping into car doors and engines as they're on these assembly lines. It's a really creative thing, and there's sort of like these strings that come in, and it's just like, and I get it, like it's trying to build up the tension or whatever. But I also thought it was just, it sort of takes away from that uniqueness.
Yeah. It wasn't a. It's a weird. It's just weird.
Right. And again, it's not terrible. It didn't ruin the episode,
Right.
obviously. But it was just something where, yeah, if they had actually just not done music at all for that entire scene, I think it would have been even better. So, yeah, I went 5 out of 10.
I gotcha. All right, let's move on to next, Liam. Let's talk about animation for this episode. Consistency, I would give this as consistent, if not, definitely, if not more consistent than the last several episodes. There's some good visuals. I love Shriek's costume.
It's awesome.
It's a super. We talked about in the very first episode of just the visuals in the Batman Beyond Rogues Gallery are so cool.
Yeah,
Shriek as a villain is so unique looking, and his, but it's. Like immediately memorable. Like you can absolutely identify him if you see him. Oh, that's Shriek. Like that's the Batman Beyond villain. So it's unique but immediately memorable, which I think makes Batman, the classic Batman Rogues Gallery, your layman who isn't necessarily a comic book nerd could probably pick out if you showed them pictures of the Joker, the Riddler, and Catwoman. They probably could tell you who they are. Maybe not so much with Batman Beyond, but I think that if it was more of a universally known thing, that's what makes these guys, these characters so good.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he's definitely one that stands out to me. If you ask me to start naming Batman Beyond villains, he's definitely at the top of the list. And I think a lot of that is because of the visual component there.
Which is ironic since he's a sound
but yeah, I thought visuals in this episode were pretty darn tremendous. I thought, as we mentioned, that final scene especially is so unique, and it's almost entirely just reliant on visuals, and they pull it off. Even sort of the frantic pace at the end is Bruce lets Ace the Bat Hound out of the Batmobile, and he goes and runs and saves Terry.
The first real action. We had a little bit of Ace in the pilot episode in Rebirth, but this he really gets into action, and he plays a big part in a couple other episodes later on. So
he literally saves Terry from being run over by a car, and they did some really really creative stuff with that. I liked the visualization of Shriek's power, sort of the sound waves, sound. That's always like a difficult thing, like in Teen Titans, like Cyborg's sonic cannon was just kind of like a blue laser beam looking thing. So there's always like different ways you try to visualize a sound weapon. Right. But I thought they did a really good job. Sort of just you see the dust sort of kicking up off the ground, and the camera shakes a little bit, and I thought they did a really good job. Sort of, again, as silly as this sounds, to visualize the sound.
One of the things you pointed out I thought that was cool too, which it may have been in one of the other episodes, but we first noticed, was Bruce's the visuals on Bruce's limousine.
Yes, Bruce's limousine is the original Batman the Animated Series Batmobile, just flipped upside down basically. So the silver grille that's on the front of it is now like on the bottom of it.
Yeah, it's really cool.
It's a cool little.
It was a good nod.
Little nod they did there. But yeah, I gave visuals 8 out of 10.
I gave it 9 out of 10.
Yeah, really really strong overall.
Yeah, I agree. All right, last but not least, Liam, let's get into voice acting. Who are our special guests for this episod of Shriek?
So really, it's just the one mostly. It's Chris Mulkey as Shriek. Done a lot of work. Not a lot that's super known to me. Like he was in Cloverfield, which is, I know, one of our favorite movies.
Yes, for sure.
But he played like a soldier in that movie. But overall, he hadn't done a ton of voice acting work, but he does provide the role of Shriek. I liked him. I thought he did a pretty good job. He's a little understated, but I think you have maybe a little bit of a different thought on it.
Yeah, I don't think enough for the disagreement alarm, but I would say that it's weird. As the character, you have the option. We've talked about going 1980s Skeletor over the top crazy, and then you have the ability to go, understated and cool, calm, and collected, Mr. Freeze, Michael Ansara type voice, and he kind of falls more towards the Mr. Freeze side of things, and I don't know that it works. Like, it's just, I don't know what, I can't pinpoint necessarily what the voice I wanted would be, but I don't think it's this guy. Like, I think it's just, his voice is just, it's too understated, and I don't necessarily feel the casting was really good on this episode for that.
Okay.
Derek Powers is great. There's a lot of great Derek Powers. We talked about his manipulation of Shriek as a character. There's some good Terry and Derek
Every
Powers.
time those two get to interact, it's so great.
It's great because he's so slimy. It's so great. And there's some great Kevin Conroy in this episode too, between him interacting with these voices that he thinks he's hearing, and then some good Terry and Bruce at the end. But so because I didn't quite feel the Shriek voice casting, I went ahead and gave voice acting 7 out of 10.
Okay. I went 9 out of 10. I did like Shriek a little bit more. I understand what you're saying, and maybe that's what prevented me from giving it a perfect score. Mm-hmm. But overall, I thought he does a good enough job. And then, Sherman Howard is Derek Powers, Kevin Conroy is Bruce, and Will Friedle is Batman. All really, really pull their weight here. The scene in the hospital where Derek Powers says he's sent Bruce to the psych ward, and Terry and him kind of get physical for a second. Mm-hmm. Like, that's really well done. And again, it's that sort of the defiant, youthful good guy against the old, slimy corporate bad guy. Like, that works really well. Bruce's reaction to all of the voices that which turns out, of course, to be a radio that Shriek has planted in his bandage. His sort of, he refuses to believe that he's going crazy, and of course at the end we find out that it's because the voices were calling him Bruce, and that's not what he calls himself, which is such an awesome. That's such an awesome really Batman thing.
It's great.
So I thought overall it was really great. Definitely the last few weeks, last few episodes with Meltdown with Heroes, the first episode we reviewed, there's not a lot of Bruce in either of those.
Yeah.
So that's for the first time in a couple of episodes here, Kevin Conroy really gets something to sink his teeth into here.
Agreed.
So that I thought really, really was helpful. And again, as we mentioned in the other categories, Will Friedle getting again to sort of have to be the detective. Again, you have multiple layers to his to the performance he has to give.
Sure.
He's not quite as sure of himself because now he's sort of in uncharted territory. So I thought, pretty much everybody's really good. So I went ahead and gave it 9 out of 10.
Nice. All right. Well, that brings us to our final. It's the bonus point. I thought we were headed. Yeah. And guess what?
It's not me.
It's not you. It's definitely me then. I am going to give an extra point to the scene that we mentioned that has no sound in it. Because what a unique and bold move that was for them to do. In cartoons, that doesn't happen. And there's no music. Up until the point where Ace gets released for the Batmobile, there's no real music. It's just footsteps is all you hear. And it's so interesting. It's so different than any other scene I've seen in any other cartoon, and especially in the DCAU, and it really, really communicates that how different this character is, and really his power, the power of being able to manipulate sound. Really, really, really awesome. So because they went that route and that took that risk, I think was a risky move, and I don't necessarily think that it panned out with the music choice that they eventually start to use, but then when that coupled with when Batman throws the Batarang and all of a sudden all the sound is switched back on and he starts screaming, and, Shriek starts screaming because all the sound floods into his ears. It's done super well. So because of that, I gave it an extra bonus point.
Awesome.
Yeah, so that brings us to our final scores. My final score for this episode is 34 out of 40. What about yours?
And I'm right in that same ballpark, 32 out of 40.
Okay.
Really, really strong episode. And again, for a debut character, and again, not just doing a Two-Face Beyond, a Clayface Beyond, completely new character, while still very fitting into that mold of a DC villain, a Batman villain. Just a great job all around.
It's great. You know what? I love that we've been through 6 episodes already of Batman Beyond. This would be, once we cover Shriek here, it's the 6th episode. And we really have liked 4 out of the 6.
Yeah.
They've been ranked pretty high. They've been in the high, low to mid 30s.
It's a strong batting average. And unlike with Superman, where we kind of picked and chose certain episodes, and obviously down the line we'll review all of them, but
we'll revisit the Superman episodes.
But going in order, unlike we did with Superman and finding so many, this is right out of the gate. We didn't jump to season 2 or anything. So from right out of the gate, they're swinging for the fences, and they're doing a good job.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Liam. Well, that will wrap us up for this week's episode of the DCAU Review. If you guys have any feedback, we'd love to hear from you. Liam, why don't you give the good people at home a reminder how they can contact us?
Well, the best way, as always, is going to be twitter.com. You can find us at DCAU Review on Twitter. Love getting feedback about the shows we're doing. We'll have an announcement right at the end of this show. Oh, yeah. But we did some Twitter polls. You guys helped us pick our topic for our 30th episode. And love getting a chance to see fan art and stuff that we get tagged in, and just interacting with people, their memories of watching these shows. And it's cool to see the different age groups, too, because there's a lot of people our age, but there's some even younger who maybe caught it in reruns on Cartoon Network, or watched the DVDs later, or, and some even a little bit older who maybe were already adults when these shows are running and just never fell out of love with it. So I like seeing the different age groups. I like seeing everybody. I like being a part of it. We always say that, and it's worth saying again because it's a really cool community to be a part of.
Absolutely. Now, we do have a Facebook page, and as a quick reminder, much like in the part of this episode where it's completely silent, that reminded me of the way it seems to be when people look for us on Facebook, or they try and find us on Facebook. You won't see us out there, because even if you like our page, it will be like deafening silence, because our Derek Powers, Mark Zuckerberg is a guy who can manipulate things and manipulate the Shrieks of the world to manipulate the algorithms so that we can't be found or heard or seen. So you can try and find us on Facebook, but the best bet is to talk to Liam on Twitter and to check out our website, DCAUReview.com. All of our episodes are up there. They're organized by category, villain, series, and of course all of our episodes are streaming on there. Liam, we do have one final announcement before we end things here. We set up a poll this week for voting on what would be our 30th episode, what topic we would cover, and we are excited to announce what that is. So we had a couple options up there. We had Justice League, we had Static and Zeta, or Zeta. I'm so glad that the Zeta. I'm excited to say that we will not. We will not be reviewing the Zeta Project. We also had an Elseworlds opportunity. We also had a movie review. So, Liam, what did the good people at home vote for?
I don't know. Do we get a drum roll for this?
Yes, there is a drum roll.
Oh, there it is. All right, the winner, and it came from behind because for a lot of the week, Elseworlds was in first place. Secret Origins, aka the first 3 episodes of Justice League, is the big winner, and
it's a narrow margin.
Yes, so that'll be our 30th episode. Will be our first episode. Will be our first episode that covers the Justice League cartoon. Excited to get to that show. I have not seen that in a long time.
Yeah.
So I think I watched it maybe when the DVDs first came out, but it's been a while since I've watched that season 1 of Justice League. I know this season 1 of Justice League has a certain dubious reputation, so I'm excited to get back into it, look at what works and what doesn't. But again, thanks to everybody for voting on Twitter, for giving us your feedback. Definitely think we will cover most, if not all, of these options in that poll at some point. There's definitely more movie reviews coming. Definitely want to do an episode about Young Justice.
Probably not Zeta Project for a long time.
No, again, that would maybe be something if we're in a really bad mood. Once we get to, I don't know, the Zeta episode of Batman Beyond, we got to review that first, and that's like 36 episodes away. Right. So we got a while before we get there, I think. But but all this, definitely Static Shock. We definitely will do some Elseworlds about Young Justice, or maybe Brave and the Bold, or the CGI Green Lantern animated series, something fun like that. We'll definitely mix some of that in the coming year. But since it was the winner, these are the rules.
Yes.
Justice League
It's
Secret Origins will be coming at you next week.
Yes, indeed. And also excited to announce, make sure you tune into next week's episode. We are going to announce a contest for our listeners. It's going to be an exciting contest. You're going to have the opportunity to win a prize. We're super excited. 30th episode coming up. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Until next week, I'm Cal.
And I'm Liam.
We'll talk to you guys on the next episode of the DCAU Review.
Bye-bye.